Hello everyone, this is Teaching Writing in College, with Tom Skeen. That's me, and the driving question is, how can instructors in higher education leverage theory, science, pedagogy, and craft most effectively to help their learners with writing? And welcome to episode 26. This is Adjusting a Lesson Plan to Accommodate Student Learning vis-a-vis genAI, Summer Reflection Series, episode 3. And so last time, I think I promised that I would walk through a lesson plan and how I would change it to help students continue to learn, even though we might also have them using AI for writing. And so that's where we're headed today. To go back to our previous discussion just a little bit, episode 25, AI has a context problem, which I think is really important because writing is highly contextual, and that presents a problem to us without AI. It presents a problem in the classroom because writing for a classroom context is naturally going to encourage the student to think about writing differently than they would if they were outside the classroom context. And so that's an important point. And I remember reading about that, encountering it, puzzling over it when I was in graduate school early on in my PhD program. In a composition theory course, we read Joseph Petralia's Reconceiving Writing, Rethinking Writing Instruction, where one of the things that he argues, that one of the problems with classroom writing is just that writing is transactional. And so when you're writing for a classroom transaction, it's about a grade, and that's a different, if I remember right, he used activity theory, so that's a different activity system than it would be if you were writing outside of the classroom, or if students were writing outside of the classroom. And so the rewards are different. The response from the teacher is going to be different versus, the kind of response they might get in a real world context. And so that got me thinking early on in my own career about transfer. But the idea that writing is transactional, there's something that's going to get done. There are going to be writers with intentions. There are going to be purposes behind that writing that are part of a larger social context. And those are different. But then AI has a context problem in a little bit of a different way because it doesn't spend time in any of the contexts and where we write and work. And so it can't pick up on contextual cues that might be important when somebody's writing to an audience, or like my example, if we're trying to describe my kitchen. So that's an important point to make as we move forward. But because AI has its own sort of context problem, that does provide us with another reason why students need to learn the material about writing that we want to bring to them in our classes, because they're going to encounter problems with writing with AI in their future writing lives. And so they need to be able to look for and find ways to problem solve for some of the shortcomings that AI will probably have. And so I am a firm believer that students need to learn about writing before they learn about AI. And then you can use those two things in tandem. They need to understand how writing works. They also need to understand how AI works. We can explore that, as time goes on. So the point of today's episode, I promised that I would walk through some lesson plans. I would show how I would adjust a lesson plan that introduces learners to the concept of presence. And just to review that briefly, that writing skill that's involved, at least in this case, presence is a rhetorical concept. It's a writing skill that I return to periodically during the semester and even across semesters in my own classes, because I think it's useful for students, being able to sort of pinpoint things that you want the reader to be thinking about, details that you want the reader to think about and to pay attention to and to notice. That's a really important skill to have, especially maybe when you have to choose among different ones and you have to decide which details are going to be most effective. And sometimes those details have to do with description, like I've been using it. Sometimes it has to do with the kind of evidence that's involved. But just this idea of presence is really important in writing. And I, in my classes, when I'm talking about presence, I will often supplement it with the ladder of abstraction, because that gives students a way to kind of see how language can have different levels of abstraction or concreteness that can also help a reader imagine what it is the writer is describing. And I also have a brief anecdote, a recent use of presence in my own teaching. I had a student who had some success with a paper that he wrote for another class. This was a student that I had for a full academic year. He was in my Composition 1 course in the fall and then my Composition 2 course in the spring. And, I had covered presence to some degree in both classes, and he knew what it was. And he came to me at the end of the second semester, and he had completed a paper for, I think it was an ecology course or biology or something like that, but he had to describe something related to an ecology and species within that ecology. He got to choose those things, and some ways in which I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a brain moment here, but it had something to do with the endangerment of a species that he had chosen to write about. And so he brought me what he had. He had a draft, and in that draft he had fulfilled all the assignment requirements. I think he brought those too, and he still had a few words, 150, 200 words left that he could still use, even though he had fulfilled the assignment. And he had done a pretty good job. He let me look over the assignment description. And one of the things I suggested to him is that he could take a little bit more time in the paper and spend a little bit more, or do a little bit more work with presence in terms of the ecology and perhaps also the animal, the species that he was writing about within that ecology, because that might help him show his instructor that he understood sort of how it worked, and it would just give them more to visualize, more to imagine. And so he did that, and he came back to me later and was excited because he had gotten a grade that he had hoped for in that particular case. And so I had some real success with that, with presence with a particular student. And it was something in our conversation. He knew what presence was because we had practiced it a lot. And the idea, he was just looking, what skills should I use, he was asking. And that seemed like a good one. So he took it and ran with it and was successful. And the last thing here on this slide for us, how to adjust a lesson plan for AI. I think the thing that I've kind of come to the conclusion about, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do podcasts because it helps me think through things a bit myself, but front-loading the rhetorical strategy for students before they use AI, I think is a really good approach to use when it comes to making sure that they learn the material and they have a good grasp of how writing works. And so just a couple of things on this slide. It just reminds me of rhetoric and what rhetoric is, because rhetoric is about generating content. At least I think it is, at least according to, it's about invention, according to Aristotle, the way that I interpret his famous idea of the available means. Rhetoric is the capacity to discover the available means of persuasion. He's not saying it's the ability to persuade, it's the ability to look at all of the possibilities and all of what's available to a writer and to take those and choose the best ones. And so I really like to try to inculcate that in my students. And it also just reminds me, this passage, concerns about AI in classrooms have a lot to do with content and who's generating the content. It often comes down to that. I remember one of the first concerns that I read about when ChatGPT came out was that somebody in high school had asked ChatGPT to write a brief, 500-word essay about some biological concept or other. And so it was the machine that came up with that content instead of the student, processing and developing that content on their own. And so that's one of the really important sort of pieces to the AI puzzle. And so foregrounding things like invention, foregrounding things like the possibilities for students is really important here for us as teachers, because then when they use AI, they can then still use the ideas. And so For example, with my kitchen, sitting down and finding all of the details myself, if I were to try to rewrite that passage that I had ChatGPT write for me, where it was not as specific, if I had sat down and come up with all of the different details I wanted to emphasize first, and then used those in my prompting with AI, I probably would have come up with a better passage, or at least ChatGPT would have. I think mine was fine, but that's because I can see my kitchen. And so using those details in prompting, I think, would help students get results that are more representative of their own use of writing. So the lesson plan. So I've got two of them on this slide. I've got before adjustments with AI and after adjustments with AI. And so I'm just going to talk through these two lists. And so before making adjustments with AI, if I am introducing students to the concept of presence, what I would do is maybe start with a brief knowledge inventory about things that we've already learned in the class, because if I'm just starting to introduce presence to them, that's a course concept, and it'll give them a chance to tie it back to the ones that we've already learned. And so a brief knowledge inventory is a great place to start, I think, when introducing a concept. Then the second thing I would do is maybe practice the ladder of abstraction without saying too much about presence. And so I would maybe give them an example of some really vague language, and then working my own way on my own example down to a really concrete description, and then having them do the same thing, maybe giving them a really vague term to start with and then working their way down. And one thing I'd like to do, I think, with this is maybe next episode just walk through the slides, the actual slides I would use in the class. I think that would be helpful so you can see more of what I'm talking about. Then the third thing I would do is provide a definition and example of presence. I like to use James Jasinski, and he's got a really good entry on presence in the source book on rhetoric. And so I would use some key ideas from that, probably quote him. I've got some slides actually that I've used where I do quote him and just say, here's what presence is. And then have students write their own example. Step 3, I would also not just provide a definition, but I would also provide an example of presence. I'd have my own passage, like maybe the one I wrote about my kitchen. And then number 4, I would have students write their own example and just have them get as detailed as they can with that. And then number 5, reflect on where presence might be useful for them later. And so give them a chance to think about the future, maybe think about their other classes. Where could they, or maybe just in the outside world, where do they see presence happening, or where might they see themselves using it? Just to think about how things work outside the classroom. So that's before adjustments with AI. After adjustments with AI, I would still do some things the same. I would start maybe with a brief knowledge inventory. What are the concepts we've already learned? Try to remember as many as you can in the next 2 minutes or something and write them down just to review them. Practice the ladder of abstraction. I would probably do that the same way, just to give them a feel for the concrete language that might be coming up that's really useful with presence. And then 3, I would do the same thing still, provide a definition and an example of presence. And so all of that would be the same up to that point. But step 4, when students do their own example, I would change it. First, I'd break it into 2 parts. First, I'd have them brainstorm lots of specific details for their own example and have them do that part first, that invention work guided by that concept of presence, all of the different little details of whatever scene they're going to describe. I would have them maybe brainstorm all of that first and just be as concrete as they possibly can with that. And then the second part would be to use AI prompts to get as nuanced of a passage as they can, as detailed of a passage as they can, using the invention material that they came up with first, just so that their brain has an opportunity to focus on that part of writing, because that way if they use AI and they're using their own material to prompt AI, then that AI passage is going to be more representative of their ideas, and it'll be more intentional on their part. And then number 5, reflect on where presence might be useful later. So that would be the same too. So basically I would just, like I say, I would just kind of front load the student's main part of the activity with invention guided by presence in this case. And so that's what I would do. And so as I was putting these slides together on this next slide, I just started thinking, well, what am I actually trying to articulate here? And so I feel like I came up with what I think is a worthwhile best practice for teaching writing in the age of AI. And I'm tentatively calling it LUPR, L-U-P-R. And it stands for learn, use, practice, and reflect. And so learn, the first part of that is learn the tools. Adjusting teaching writing with AI means make sure students are using the tools first. They need time to internalize those tools. And then second, use the tools. They also need to use the tools as they're trying to get what they want out of AI. So using their own details, in this case, front-loaded presence with a chatbot will help that chatbot hone its description and make it more representative. So even if they're using AI, they're still using rhetorical tools. And then P, practice the tools. Look for opportunities to bring the tool back and practice it in a different way with and without AI. And so that's about, adding lesson plans, circling back, just good interleaved practice like we read about in educational psychology. And then the last one, reflect. Reflect on the tools. What is AI not capable of? What is it capable of? How much would they need to do themselves versus how much they could delegate to AI? Having students practice making those judgments so that when they look at a piece of AI writing or they have an opportunity to use AI in some way to support whatever they're doing, then they can, we can get them used to making those judgments. And so to some extent, I incorporated all of these probably into my lesson. Probably that wouldn't have to happen every time, but it's, I think, kind of a good guide. So I may try it out this fall and see how it goes, see if I can kind of use it consistently myself as I'm working on my lesson plans for my classes. And so next episode, the lesson plans themselves, I'll bring them in. I'll talk through the old one. I'll talk through the new one. Front-loaded with details, with presence. And so that's what I'll do. And so that's what I have for now. So I just want to thank you very much. And I look forward to doing another episode in the near future. Here are the different contact points for Teaching Writing in College. There's email, teachingwritingincollege@gmail.com. Facebook, it's my page on Facebook, Teaching Writing in College. There's Blue Sky at teachingwriting.bsky.social. YouTube is at Teaching Writing in College. Mastodon is mastodon.social/@Teaching Writing in College. And so I also want to thank, just because I really like this, you may have noticed if you watch on YouTube that I use LibreOffice Impress to do my slides. I like it because it's lightweight and I'm using a Raspberry Pi computer to do it. And I've used this for quite a while, LibreOffice. It's a piece of open source software that I use with Linux systems. And I just want to thank LibreOffice themselves. And then also down at the bottom of the slide, you can see the yellow idea template for LibreOffice Impress. This is a template that somebody made and donated more or less to LibreOffice. And so it comes up and people who use LibreOffice can use it. But the person is at ealita.id. And so that's the person. So I'd like to thank them very much for making such a nice looking slide deck that I could use with the podcast. So thanks again very much. I hope you're enjoying the rest of your summer. I know that for some folks, the fall semester starts here soon. I have a little bit of time. I've got until the day after Labor Day. But before that, I'd like to try to squeeze in some more episodes, maybe try to work ahead a little bit so I can stay consistent with the episodes. And then when the work hits in the fall, I will try to just be consistent if I can. So thank you so much for watching, listening, subscribing, liking, and I will see you next time. Until then, I'll see you later.